daily viewers. Today we're going to discuss the discography of the Iowa legends, the Des Moines legends at that, Slipknot. Now, Slipknot have been around since 1995 and they're a very legendary metal band, but let's discuss every album, especially since they released their new album, The End So Far, and I have my own controversial opinion when it comes to that particular release, but let's just talk about every album. So, I made a video recently of the new Slipknot album, but it got copyright claims, so I decided to delete it and make a new one. So, this will be a little treat for you Slipknot maggots. But, with that out of the way, let's dive right into the legendary music of Slipknot. Now, I think my least favorite by far is probably All Hope Is Gone. The name really does live up to the album as well as the sound of it, since it just is so boring and monotonous and just it really does sound like the 2000s, the embodiment of mid 2000s butt rock, and I'm not a fan of it. It just sounds like Stone Sour but slightly heavier. And they do have some good tracks like Gehenna and Psychosocial, but even those songs get boring after a while. The only song that I ever go back to when it comes to this pick is Sulfur. Sulfur is a really hard-hitting song, but every other song just sounds monotonous and just very interchangeable. But I guess the next album is probably The Gray Chapter. I think that's after that follows up All Hope Is Gone. It's the follow-up to the album, and I think it's their second worst album, but it's still really decent for what it is, since I mean it's their comeback album after Paul Gray passed away and Joey Jordison left the band. They were really going through a rough time. You can really hear it with the sound of this album and the production of it. It's very raw. They have songs like The Devil and I and Kill Pop and The Negative One. Those are standout tracks, notable ones. But the rest of them are kind of boring and interchangeable. This has the opposite problem of All Hope Is Gone, which All Hope Is Gone has very butt rock anthems, while this has very boring, heavy songs. Because you can make heavy songs easily, but it's one thing to make heavy songs, but it's another thing to put emotion in those songs and make it really visceral and very emotional. And I feel like it didn't really do that for the most part in this album, except for, like I said, Kill Pop and The Negative One. But I do like the intro song, XIX. It's a really good song, really sad and emotional and just gut-wrenching, you know? But every other song is not as interesting as those picks. And subsequently, the next album that's slightly better than this is probably We Are Not Your Kind. I think that the follow-up for this album, too, is I think it follows up with that. We Are Not Your Kind, it's kind of the more official comeback for Slipknot, because their previous album wasn't as good, but this really does feel like the sequel to All Hope Is Gone and Subliminal Verses. It really does feel as if they've gotten their stuff together and really identified their new sound and built a cohesive album. And it really does feel like that, especially with their intro song. I think it's Slot Coin or something along those lines. Really cool interlude. There's lots of cool, unique interludes, and I've never really liked their interludes throughout their discography, but this album has notable ones at that, and the best interludes in their whole career, especially Death Because of Death and all other picks. But I think those are my favorite interludes, and I think Unsainted, despite how popular it is, it's still really good. Has a really good hook and really cool key changes, and yeah, just really overall solid song. And I think Solway Firth is by far the best song, the most superior song and standout song on the album. It's really heavy, and I just love how the music video involves the boys, which is pretty unique since I'm a comic fan, but still a really cool song. It's heavy, it's in your face, and it's just very visceral, and I love it. And it's a pretty good album, but there's also some things that kind of downgraded that have some drawbacks, like Critical Darling and Nero Forte are kind of boring to me. Very stereotypical Slipknot songs that aren't heavy, but just like slightly heavier than 3 Days Grace or bands like that in that category. But yeah, I think the next album, I think, is probably Subliminal Verses. Now, there's one album that's actually better than this, and it's going to be controversial since it was recently released, but I think this Subliminal Verses is their fourth best album. It's still a really good album. It's very underrated, especially songs like Vermilion, Vermilion Part 2, The Pulse of the Maggots, songs like that. But I also don't really enjoy the big hits on this album, like Duality and Before I Forget. I mean, it's just a very forgettable album. They had such standout albums in their beginning of their career, like, Self-Titled in Iowa, but then they just dropped this, and it kind of stooped ever since then. And, I mean, it's still similar and it resembles them as a band with their other two albums. It does still resemble that Slipknot formula, but it's a lot softer, and that's not a main complaint, but just feels more monotonous and doesn't really have a lot of emotion and substance to it. It's not very genuine, especially with the standout songs. But I do like Vermilion Part 2. It's one of the only ballads they've ever made that I enjoy. I didn't really like Snuff from All Hope Is Gone, but I did like Vermilion Part 2. And I think their third best album is what they actually released yesterday, The End So Far. That might be surprising since I've been seeing lots of reviews from casual fans and devoted fans alike giving it like a D or a C or just very mediocre scores, but I actually think this is a very good album. I'd give it probably an A, a 90% when it comes to the overall verdict of the album and the release. And this just proves that they can still release great music. Their output can still be good, because I didn't come into this album expecting much, but I love songs like The Dying Song and Chapel on Rag. The singles on this album definitely beat the other albums that were previous on this list. And yeah, those songs are great, but they also have other experimental and diverse songs that range from Acidic to Hive Mind. Those two songs in particular that are not singles are really good. And Yen is still good, another good single. My least favorite single, but still good. But I think by far my favorite song is Acidic. It just blows my mind how they can still be this experimental and avant-garde in this late in their career. And this just proves that they still have many tricks up their sleeves. They still have more things to provide for their fans and more things to flesh out and develop. And I really enjoy that. I really respect them for trying new things despite their age. They're in their 50s and they still manage to release things that are baffling yet interesting. So I guess from now on I gotta expect the unexpected when it comes to Slipknot. And I'm also happy for them and proud for them for the fact that they cut their ties with Roadrunner. Their deal's done and they're liberated from them. So I'm happy to hear that. I'm very relieved and hope they keep going hard and they keep having a prosperous adventure with their band. But my second favorite, this is a difficult choice because their first two albums, their early days, they go hard. They're really good and just so relentless. The sound of those albums, so relentless. But I think I gotta say, Iowa is actually my second favorite. That might be controversial and polarizing to some because that is like the golden album of the 2000s. That's one of the best metal albums ever made. I mean, I've listened to death metal and black metal and deathcore, but most of those albums never even compare to this album. They all pale to comparison to this album, to mainly due to the fact how heavy it is. I mean, it does sound more clean. It does sound better produced than most albums that in those genres, but it still sounds really good. It sounds so heavy. Songs like New Abortion, Disaster Piece, People Equal Shit, My Plague, Left Behind, Heretic Anthem. I mean, such classics. I love almost every song in this album. I definitely think the upper songs on the album, the first couple songs that range from Heretic Anthem, like I said, and My Plague are much better than the bottom half, but still really good. You can really tell that they're going through a rough ride in their career, this stage, because I mean, the drugs, the heroin, and you just can really hear how much pain is in this music. And this is an example of the torture artist making great music, because I do believe people in their dark days can make masterpieces, and this is no exception. And this is one of the best metal albums I've ever heard in my life. But I think something about the first album takes the cake for me, and let me tell you why. The self-titled just it sounds more raw to me and more anthemic, and you can really tell adolescent kids are making this particular album because it's just so great. It's so amazing, and it's just they really don't hold back when it comes to this album. Songs like Eyeless, Eyeless, Wait and Bleed, Spit It Out, Liberate, Purity, Sick. I mean, all those songs are just so good. No Scissors, I think is the correct name. Bash me in the comments if you will, if that's incorrect. But I mean, every song is just so great. It's so raw and distorted, and I think Sid Wilson, the DJ of the band, is so great with all the hip hop influences with the DJing, especially with all the samples. And Sid Wilson doesn't get enough credit, especially with his masks too. They're really great, especially his newer ones, but I digress. The album is just so great, and it's one of the few new metal albums that are noteworthy and should listen to. And this is probably the only album that has that new metal influence, but it's so great, and I can never stop listening to it. It's such a great album. I think like the Iowa and this album are basically interchangeable when it comes to how good they are. They both connect together. They both are contenders, and I think they both have the same level when it comes to the verdict. But I think I like this album a little bit more just because this is what introduced me. Wait and Bleed, especially that music video, as well as the Spit Out video that portrays a Slipknot in The Shining, which is pretty cool, unique. And let me rephrase, when it comes to, they're not interchangeable. That's the incorrect word I meant. They're both on equal terms when it comes to how great they are, and this album is definitely no exception. This does really show how captivating their music is and how much it can draw someone in when it comes to these two albums in particular. But the rest of the albums are pretty good. But the thing about Slipknot is they've never released a terrible album. Even All Hope Is Gone, the Great Chapter, there's things I can nitpick, of course, but I still find hidden gems, like Gehenna, like I said, as well as Kill Pop. And yeah, I think that's about wraps it up. I hope you guys enjoyed the new Slipknot album.